Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and today we'll be doing something a bit more interesting. We'll be actually creating a Instagram story again. This time it's a more personal project. So let's dive right in. So first thing you want to do is create a 9x16 project, light gray as always. And the first thing I do is create my background layer. So I stretch the screen, and remember, always name your layers. So this is our background, and I want this to be black. It doesn't really matter at this point, but let's add our images. So now, as you've seen, I add my first image, and I already know how long I want this to be. I want this to be about 15 or 10 seconds because, as I said earlier, this is going to be an Instagram story. So let's go about there. Our next step though is we're going to throw in some elements that we have. I have a logo, I have some text and an arrow. We just want to get everything on or in our project right now, and then we'll start placing them exactly where we want them to go. And this is a more simple project, and we'll be using really one technique, and that's the move and transform option. So let's scale these down a bit, change the position. Now, one good tip is always try to create the design first in some other program. I tend to use Affinity Designer on iPad to create my designs, and then once I have the design done and ready, I would put them in Alight Motion, exporting the various elements that I would need or that I want to move to get the entire thing to work as I picture it. So as you see here, I'm really just placing everything where I want them to be and adjusting the size as I go along. Let me quickly show you what this entire design looks like before we go any further. So I'll be throwing that up on the screen right now. So because I know what the design looks like, I know exactly what I'm going for, and that really makes it better when you're working. Another quick tip is try to stay away from the edges as much as possible. You don't want to have the design on the edge too much. And we're getting there. And if you're not really sure what the design should look like, feel free to just throw it in Alight Motion and kind of layer it on top. And I'm going to show you that trick real quick. So we could do, let's find it, it's here. So this is what we're creating, as you've seen earlier. With this now, what I can do is I can jump into this layer, change my opacity, and as you see, in changing my opacity, I'm seeing everything else, all the elements individually that I would have, adjusted or placed in my project. So now I'll keep that one at the top and just move these ones around until I have them in the position that I want them to be in. Now you don't have to be extremely perfect with this, but that actually helps. So as you see here, I'm just about there with this one, so I'll quickly move on, because this is really just to give you guys a general idea of what you can do. It really does help though when you have your design done before you enter Alight Motion. I need to make this arrow a bit smaller, about there, and then the logo comes here. And there you have it. So let's hide this layer, and now it's time to make this design move. So we can remove this, and we're only using position keyframes for this tutorial. I may use a bit of blending and opacity, but it's really just position keyframes for this tutorial. So I want everything to kind of fade up or fade in while moving up, and that's exactly what we're about to do. So let me just make some markers here. And as you know, this is an Instagram story, so it cannot be too long, but you want it to really grab attention as you go along. I want this or logo to really fade in from the very beginning and let it get there by about 5 or 6 seconds. Let's do 6 seconds. So here we're going to add a keyframe there, and we're going back to 0, and we're going to leave a keyframe there. So as it moves, our logo just fades in, while everything else will actually be moving up in a different direction. So the first thing that we want persons to know is, hey, we're accepting bookings. So let's actually make this one be the first thing that appears on the screen, and we'll do that by making a keyframe here, going back to 1 second and bringing it down a bit, and then we're going to add a curve, and we want this to ease out, and I'm going to copy this curve because I'll be using it on all the other elements. So as for this one, we could get this in at around 2 seconds. So let's get our keyframe here and another keyframe at 1 second. Let's throw in our easing curve by pasting it there, and let's move the position down a bit. So we're getting there. However, let's kind of make these disappear and then appear as they're going up. So let's add another keyframe. Let's start with this top one, and we'll add a keyframe for blending up and opacity. Add another keyframe here, bring this to 0, and paste the curve. Let's do that for this one as well. Add a keyframe at 2 seconds, blending and opacity, paste the curve. One thing to note is your curve has to be in between 2 keyframes. So if you try to add a curve here on this keyframe, it won't work, right? It has to be in between these 2 keyframes, or 2 keyframes. If you have 3 keyframes, you can add a curve in between each, but it cannot be here or here. It has to be in between the time that you actually made a mark at. So now we have something that looks a bit like this. And finally, we're going to, add this send us a message. And I think I'm going to move it up a bit because there's something I'm thinking of with this arrow. So let's get our arrow just a tad bit some more up. There we go. So what we're actually going to do now is we're going to let this arrow go. And as you see here, I'm having a little competition between the send us a message and the logo. So I have to push it back down a bit. Okay, this should be fine. So now what we're going to do is we're going to let or send us a message fade in at about 4 seconds. So let's add a keyframe here. Go to 5 seconds, add a keyframe here. And let's change the position for this down ever so slightly. And we're using the same curve, so it's just copy and paste. And then once we have this, we add another keyframe, at the same spot for blending and opacity. Put the opacity at 0 and paste the curve. And then finally, we want our arrow to be pointing down in a nice little fluid motion. So let's actually get that happening right now. So we're actually going to do this and make it a bit faster than how everything else was moving. So we could go after 6 seconds. So let's remove this mark and make a mark here and here. So after 6 seconds, we could add a keyframe here, add a keyframe here, bring it down just a tad bit, bring it back up, bring it down again, 8 seconds, bring it back up, bring it down, and finally back up. And for this one, we're going to actually be using an ease in, ease out keyframe for all of these. shorten this layer here so it pops in right at the 6-second mark. So altogether we have something that looks like this. So thank you guys so much for watching, and like this video if you like this video, subscribe, and drop a comment if you have any tutorials that you want me to go over. And thank you again, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.